quiet black employee, an off-the-record meeting, and a so-called culture fit issue, what no one expected. He wasn't recording just for fun. The hum of the overhead lights mingled with the soft tapping of keyboards, a quiet rhythm that filled the open-plan office like white noise. It was late afternoon in downtown Chicago, and the sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long golden shadows across the sleek marble floor. The city buzzed just beyond the glass, but inside, everything moved at a careful, professional pace. Marcus Ellis sat at his desk near the corner, his back straight, eyes scanning lines of code on his dual monitors. He wore a charcoal gray blazer over a navy button-up shirt, his usual style, clean, minimal, and sharp. His desk was impeccably organized, a contrast to the loose wires and humming machines he managed daily as part of the IT infrastructure team. He wasn't the type to draw attention, but he was the kind of person people noticed. Reliable, composed. At 32, Marcus had carved out a quiet sort of respect in the office. The interns called him the firewall whisperer. Managers trusted him. Even executives occasionally sought him out for quiet, late-day consults when their machines froze 5 minutes before a board meeting. He didn't speak more than necessary, but when he did, it was always thoughtful, measured, precise. That was Marcus. Waters, always running deep. Still, today felt ... off. He couldn't quite name why. He adjusted the collar of his shirt as a bead of sweat traced a slow path down the back of his neck. The air conditioning hummed steadily overhead. Everything looked the same. Nothing had changed, yet something had. A gut feeling, maybe, an intuition that didn't make sense but refused to be ignored. Double quotes. "Hey, Ellis," came a voice from across the row of cubicles. It was Jenny, his teammate in I. Her red curls bounced as she leaned over the partition with a smirk. "You look like you're trying to debug the universe." Marcus chuckled under his breath. "Close. Just a network traffic issue on the 3rd floor. Someone keeps streaming true crime podcasts during work hours." Jenny grinned. Multitasking at its finest. The easy exchange helped loosen something in his chest, but only for a moment. Then his inbox chimed. Subject: quick chat, HRNO greeting. No explanation, just a calendar invite for 3:15 p.m. from Susan White, the company's head of human resources. Marcus stared at the screen, blinking. He checked the clock in the corner. 3:05 p.m., 10 minutes. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, motionless. He had no pending complaints, no disputes. His last performance review had been stellar, consistently exceeds expectations. So what was this? Across the office, a team of interns laughed too loudly, earning a few annoyed glances from senior staff. Phones rang. A manager walked briskly toward the elevators. The office looked normal, but now Marcus felt like he was the only one not in on something. He glanced around, half expecting someone to say, "It's nothing, just a formality." No one did. "Everything good?" Jenny asked, catching the shift in his posture. Marcus looked up. "HR wants to talk." Jenny raised an eyebrow. "Weird. You don't even have drama." He gave her a weak smile. "Maybe I won the Employee of the Month lottery." But even as he said it, his stomach sank. He clicked accept on the meeting invite, stood slowly, and adjusted his blazer as if it might shield him from whatever was waiting down the hallway. The walk to HR was short, but felt strangely long. He passed by familiar faces that had always nodded, smiled, exchanged casual hellos. Today, some of them didn't look up. A few glanced at him and quickly turned away. That was the second thing that felt wrong. The HR wing was tucked into a quiet corner of the building. Frosted glass doors, soft carpets, neutral tones, and hushed voices. A place designed to feel safe, though Marcus now realized how sterile it was. Clinical even. Susan was already waiting when he arrived, sitting behind her desk with a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Marcus," she said smoothly, gesturing to the chair across from her. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." "No problem," he replied, taking a seat, keeping his voice steady. The room felt a degree too warm. On the desk, in front of her, lay a folder, closed. Marcus didn't know what was inside, but every instinct told him it had something to do with him. He folded his hands in his lap and waited. The low hum of the office beyond the glass seemed to dim, and though nothing in the room had moved, everything in Marcus's world had just shifted. The screen blinked once, then the new message appeared. Like a shadow falling across the room, Marcus's inbox was usually predictable. Automated system alerts, meeting invites, an occasional meme from Jenny, titled "When the servers go down, and you're the only one who can save us." But this one wasn't like the others. The subject line was blank. The sender, Susan White, HR manager. He clicked. "Hi Marcus. Can we have a quick chat this afternoon? Say around 3:15. Thanks, Susan." No greeting, no context, no hint of urgency or reassurance, just ... clinical. Marcus's eyes lingered on the word chat. It wasn't the kind of word you used for official matters. It felt casual, dismissive, like swatting at something with a smile. But that was the thing about HR emails. They never said what they meant. He leaned back slightly, one hand still on the mouse. The cold wording of the message began to loop in, his mind turning over like a stone in water. He checked his calendar. There was no prior notice, no scheduled review, no client complaints, just a clean row of completed tasks and a glowing performance score from the last quarter. Still, something in his chest tightened. Everything okay? Marcus looked up to see Jenny peering at him from across the partition. Her curly red hair framed a face that was equal parts sharp and soft. The kind of coworker who could crack a joke and also catch a bad cable configuration before it blew the whole system offline. "I don't know," Marcus said, his voice lower than usual. He turned his monitor slightly toward her. "HR wants to talk." Jenny squinted at the email and raised an eyebrow. No subject line. "That's cold." He nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth twitching in an attempt at a smile. "Maybe they want to promote me without the suspense." Jenny grinned. "Or maybe you're being awarded most unbothered employee in a crisis. I mean, you did fix the CFO's laptop during that power surge without even breaking a sweat." But Marcus didn't laugh this time. He closed the email and tried to return his attention to the diagnostic report on his screen. But the code had stopped making sense. Letters blurred into symbols, and the logic unraveled in his mind. "Seriously, though," Jenny said, voice softer now, "you think it's something bad?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He thought of the executive meeting last week, the one where he'd corrected a senior manager's misinterpretation of the company's new server migration timeline. It wasn't personal, just facts. But afterward, the air in the room had shifted. A tension had settled into the silence, unnoticed by most but not by Marcus. He also remembered the look on Susan's face that day. Her polite smile had slipped, just for a second. Now, that smile had returned, digitally, coldly, through an email with no context. "I don't know what to think," Marcus finally said. Jenny gave him a look, part concern, part challenge. "Want me to snoop? I could ask around." He shook his head. "No, I'll just go. It's probably nothing." But even as he said it, a strange pressure bloomed in his chest, a kind of premonition, not of drama or confrontation, but of something worse. Quiet dismissal, the kind where no one raises their voice, but something is taken from you anyway, the kind that leaves you questioning whether it even happened. He glanced at the clock. 3:09. 6 minutes. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered once before returning. Too normal. The AC kicked on again, sending a subtle whoosh through the vents. Around him, the office carried on. Fingers danced on keyboards. Printers buzzed. Someone in accounting chuckled at something on their phone. The world hadn't changed, but Marcus had. Something inside him had shifted the moment he read that message. He closed his laptop slowly and stood, smoothing down the front of his blazer with both hands. The fabric felt heavier than usual, more constrictive, like it had decided to remember gravity. Jenny watched him for a second. "You've got that look." "What look?" "The one you get when you're 2 steps ahead of the rest of us, and you know something's coming." Marcus offered a small, tired smile. "I hope I'm wrong this time." He walked away from his desk with practiced ease, but each step toward the HR office felt like it echoed louder than it should have. Somewhere behind him, Jenny returned to her screen, her smile fading just a little. The hallway to HR was lined with abstract art and framed slogans about innovation and diversity and inclusion. Marcus had walked this path before, once for orientation, once to help install a new router. But today, it felt longer, as if the carpet was quietly absorbing his footsteps and his presence all at once. He didn't know what he was walking into, but somehow, he already knew he wouldn't walk back out the same. The HR office was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that didn't feel like peace, but pressure. Marcus sat across from Susan White in the glass-walled room that overlooked the main hallway. The frosted edges of the windows offered the illusion of privacy, but everything inside felt exposed, clinical, sterile. Stage. Susan folded her hands neatly on the desk in front of her. A closed manila folder rested beside a ceramic mug that read "People First." The irony made Marcus's stomach turn. She offered a tight-lipped smile. "Thanks for coming in." Marcus nodded once. "Of course." There was a pause, long enough to make the air feel heavier. Susan exhaled slowly, as if preparing herself for something unpleasant. "I want to start by saying this isn't easy. These kinds of conversations never are." Marcus felt his pulse begin to climb. His palms itched with the urge to ask what kind of conversation, but he waited. He'd learned long ago that speaking too soon, too strongly, too emotionally could be used against you. Susan continued, voice soft but rehearsed. "We've received some concerns. Feedback, really, from a few different team members, and some leadership." Marcus tilted his head. "Concerns about what, exactly?" She shifted slightly in her seat. "About your attitude, the way you engage with feedback, a pattern of behavior that some have interpreted as ... combative." The word landed like a slap. He blinked. "Combative." She nodded slowly. "Closed off, unwilling to collaborate, resistant when challenged." Marcus stared at her, trying to process the words, the tone, the complete detachment from any reality he knew. His heart thudded in his chest, not from guilt, but from confusion, and then anger. Cold, quiet anger. "I've never had a single disciplinary notice," he said, carefully. "I've delivered every project ahead of schedule. I've trained new hires, volunteered overtime, fixed systems during emergencies. If there was an issue, why am I only hearing about this now?" Susan didn't flinch. "This isn't about metrics." Marcus that stopped him. "Then what is it about?" She folded her hands again. "Culture fit." The words were light, almost harmless on the surface, but Marcus heard the weight beneath them, the centuries of coded language, of boardroom whispers disguised as professionalism. He felt it settle in his bones like a familiar ache. "Who said this?" he asked, his voice still steady, but lower now. "Who gave this feedback?" Susan hesitated just long enough to reveal the answer. "We don't name individuals in these situations. It's about the collective experience." Marcus's jaw clenched out. Collective experience. Another veil, another shield. No names meant no accountability. No specifics meant no defense. "You're telling me I'm being labeled as a problem," he said slowly, deliberately, "by people who won't put their names on it, ... for reasons no one will explain." Susan offered the same neutral smile. "This isn't a punishment. It's a decision that reflects the best direction for the team, for the company." He shook his head in disbelief. "So I'm being fired?" Susan didn't say the word. She only slid the folder toward him. Inside was the standard corporate termination package, severance details, a non-disclosure clause, a pre-filled resignation form to keep things clean. His final day was today, effective immediately. Marcus didn't move. He looked down at the folder, then back at Susan, who now avoided his eyes. The woman who once shook his hand after his system overhaul last year now stared past him like he wasn't there at all. For a long, fragile moment, the only sound was the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above. Then Marcus stood slowly. Purposefully, he didn't raise his voice, didn't slam his hands on the table. He just looked at her and said, "You can dress it up however you want, but this is what it looks like when someone like me stops making you comfortable." Susan opened her mouth to respond, but he was already turning away. As he reached for the door handle, her voice followed him. "I wish you the best in your next chapter." Marcus didn't answer. He stepped out into the hallway where the office world kept turning. Phones ringing, keys clicking, co-workers chatting by the water cooler as if nothing had happened. But for Marcus, everything had changed. He walked back to his desk in silence. Jenny looked up when she saw him approach, her expression faltering when she saw the look on his face. "What happened?" He didn't answer. Not right away. He just opened his desk drawer and began packing his things, one item at a time, calmly, methodically, as if he were debugging a system one last time. No announcement, no email, no farewell party. Just silence on the box. When he reached the elevator, he turned back for one last glance at the place where he had given so much, only to be dismissed by shadows and whispers. The doors closed. And Marcus Ellis disappeared from the company, without a trace. But his story, that was only just beginning. Marcus walked through the office like a ghost, a cardboard box cradled in his arms, filled with the carefully curated pieces of his work life and external hard drive. A framed photo of his niece, the coffee mug Jenny gave him last Christmas, that read CTRL plus Alt plus chill. The weight wasn't much, but it felt like a burden, not just because of what was inside, but because of what had been left behind. His dignity, his voice, his place. He moved silently, past rows of desks and distracted co-workers, each absorbed in their screens, Slack messages, or the soothing clatter of the keyboard. But as he passed, the atmosphere shifted minute by minute, breath by breath. Some glanced up, brows furrowed with confusion. Others lowered their eyes as soon as they met his. One woman near the break room whispered something to her colleague, and quickly turned away when Marcus approached. No one said goodbye. No one asked if he was okay. Only Jenny stood when she saw him. Her mouth opened slightly, as if she wanted to say something, anything, but the words didn't come. Her eyes filled with quiet disbelief. Her hands fidgeted at her sides. Marcos gave her a small nod. It was the only goodbye he could offer. That only one that wouldn't break him in half. As the elevator doors slid shut, he caught one final glimpse of the office, the rows of chairs, the posters about teamwork and inclusion, the glass conference rooms where he'd once led strategy sessions. With calm precision, it all faded behind steel doors and a soft ding. Downstairs, the sun had dipped lower, casting long shadows between buildings. The street was busy with people clocking out, laughing, rushing to the subway, balancing coffee cups and phone calls. The world hadn't stopped. It never did, but Marcus had. He stood still on the sidewalk, the city pressing in around him, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't know where to go. By the time he reached home, dusk had settled into the neighborhood. That his mother's house sat quietly on a tree-lined street in South Shore. The porch light was on, as it always was when she knew he might stop by. A small gesture, one he used to take for granted. Tonight, it felt like the only lighthouse on an otherwise indifferent coast. She opened the door before he knocked. "Marcus," he said softly, her warm eyes scanning his face before drifting to the box in his arms. "You're early." He stepped inside without a word. The familiar scent of her lavender oil and the slow rhythm of gospel music playing faintly from the living room offered a small comfort, but only on the surface. She closed the door behind him. He placed the box on the kitchen table. The cardboard creaked under the strain of its silence. His mother approached gently. She didn't prod, didn't rush, just stood beside him, her presence steady, like she'd done when he scraped his knees as a boy and couldn't find the words for why it hurt so badly. Finally, she asked, "Did something happen?" Marcus looked at her. It wasn't anger on his face. It wasn't even sadness. It was something deeper, a quiet devastation, like something sacred had been stolen, but not violently. Just, subtly, with a smile, with paperwork, with a nod. "Fired me," he said. His voice cracked. He hadn't expected that. She blinked slowly. "What? Why?" He sat down at the table, suddenly exhausted. He ran his hand over the box's edges, like if he kept touching it, it would all make more sense. "For being me," he finally said. "They said I didn't fit, that I was difficult, that I had an attitude, but I never raised my voice, never missed a deadline. I just, existed. And that was enough to make them uncomfortable." His mother sat across from him. "So they made you the problem?" He nodded once. "Yeah, just like that." The next day, the rumors started. At first, it was just a couple of Slack messages Jenny forwarded to him. "Did you hear what happened with Marcus?" "Yeah, I heard he had issues with authority. Wasn't he kind of cold in meetings? Honestly, I always felt like he had a chip on his shoulder." They used past tense like he had died. Some called him aggressive. Others said he wasn't. A team player. Words that weren't in his file. Words that didn't match the version of him that stayed late to reboot servers, that trained new interns on weekends, that took the heat when clients yelled but never passed it down. He texted Jenny once, "Let them say what they want. They needed a reason, and if they couldn't find one, they'd make one." Jenny replied, "This isn't right. I'm going to find out what really happened." He didn't respond, because deep down, Marcus already knew, in places like that, for people like him, the whispers always warned, lest someone made them loud enough to be heard. He looked down at the box again that night, at the contents of a career that had been reduced to items he could carry in his arms. It wasn't the weight of the box that broke him. It was how light it was, how little they let him take after giving them everything. It had been 5 days, 5 long, echoing days, since Marcus walked out of the building that had once felt like a second home, and now only haunted him in the quiet hours of the night. His days had dissolved into a strange kind of stillness, neither rest nor motion. Time moved, but he didn't. He barely touched his laptop. The familiar glow of code that once gave him focus now only reminded him of what was taken. The job wasn't just a job. It was dignity, rhythm, a place in the world, and they'd erased it without a trace. That evening, the sky outside was the color of bruised lilac, heavy with humidity and unshade rain. Cicadas buzzed lazily in the trees outside his window. Marcus sat on the couch, a mug of untouched coffee cooling on the table beside him. He was staring at the wall, not thinking, not feeling, just ... existing ... Then the knock came. 3 soft taps. He didn't move at first. Then again, more insistent. He opened the door and blinked at the sight in front of him. Jenny. She stood there, flushed from the walk-up, curls damp with the late summer heat. She wore a faded hoodie and jeans, and carried a worn brown satchel over one shoulder. Her expression wasn't casual. It wasn't even kind. It was something else, something urgent. "I know it's late," she said, "but I couldn't sit on this." Marcus stepped aside without a word. She entered like she didn't need permission, like a friend who knew silence could mean someone was on the edge of something. They sat across from each other. In the dim light of the living room, Jenny dug into her satchel and pulled out her phone. Her hands trembled, slightly not from fear, but from restraint, like she was holding something radioactive. "I wasn't supposed to hear this," she said, "but I was fixing the projector in conference room to the morning before they fired you. The AV system was still recording internal feed, audio sync, and I heard something." Marcus leaned forward, slowly. Jenny took a breath, tapped her screen, and let the recording play. There was a burst of static, then a clear female voice clipped. "Familiar. Susan White. He's too intense. You know how they get when they think they're being challenged. Better we let him go before it becomes a problem." Silence. Then another voicemail, probably from upper management. "I've flagged him before. Too serious doesn't soften his tone. Even when he's right, it sounds ... threatening." "Exactly," Susan agreed. "I don't want to wait until someone accuses him of being aggressive in a meeting. It's a matter of time." The audio clicked off. Marcus didn't move. For a second, he thought maybe he'd misheard. Maybe the rage building in his chest was a trick of memory. But no, he knew what he'd just heard. Jenny spoke again, her voice low. "They were planning it. Long before that meeting. They didn't care about your work. They just ... didn't like how you showed up." Marcus's throat tightened. The words wouldn't come. Jenny opened her email on her phone and held it out. "There's more. Internal messages. I wasn't supposed to see them, but, well, you know how sloppy Chad from finance is with his CC." Marcus scrolled. "Let's keep an eye on Marcus Ellis. His tone in leadership sinks is getting sharper. Not saying it's hostile, just makes people uncomfortable. You know how that reads. Too much edge, not a culture fit, not one mention of missed deadlines, not one complaint about performance. Only tone, presence, perception. He wasn't fired because of what he did. He was fired because of who he was. His voice, his skin, his quiet refusal to shrink in rooms that weren't made for him." Marcus leaned back, the weight of it hitting him like a sudden storm. He rubbed his hands over his face, then looked at Jenny. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, voice hoarse. Jenny's expression didn't waver. "Because I was complicit in silence. I didn't speak up when they started whispering. I thought it would blow over, that your work would protect you." Her eyes shone, not with guilt, but resolve. "But I watched them erase you, and I realized that next, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next month, but eventually, if I stay silent, they win." Marcus looked down at the phone again. The evidence, the plan, the bias, naked and undeniable. His story hadn't ended in that HR office. It had just found its teeth. He exhaled deeply, the anger no longer clouded by confusion. Now it had shape. Now it had purpose. "Thank you," he said quietly. Jenny nodded. "What are you going to do?" He stood slowly, spine straightening with something unfamiliar in the days since he left that building. Not rage, not pride, power. I'm going to burn the whole facade down. The law office smelled like old wood and fresh coffee. A faint trace of lavender hung in the air, likely from the assistant's desk diffuser down the hall. It was comforting in an unexpected way, like the kind of peace you find in a storm shelter, not because the winds have passed, but because someone finally bolted the door shut. Marcus sat across from a woman whose presence filled the room with calm authority. Danielle Ross, civil rights attorney, mid-40s, fierce eyes behind thin gold-rimmed glasses. She read people the way some read code line by line, motive by motive. I've seen a lot of cases like yours, she said after hearing his story. But yours, they left fingerprints everywhere. Marcus nodded slowly, still adjusting to the new terrain he was entering. Lawsuits weren't in his nature. He was a fixer, not a fighter. But there was no system left to fix, not inside that office. And this time, silence would be another kind of surrender. Danielle opened a leather folder and laid out a plan like a map on a battlefield. We file under Title VII wrongful termination based on race and a hostile work environment masked as performance management. From what you've shown me, they were careful, but not careful enough. She was right. With Jenny's help, Marcus had collected more than whispers. There were emails with cultural tone misalignment noted next to his name, performance evaluations that had mysteriously shifted in language over time, words like confident replaced with defensive, leader changed to rigid, feedback forms that were redacted by HR, yet leaked through internal file versions Jenny recovered. More troubling were the HR memos marked internal only, where Marcus's name had been discussed, not for poor work, but for being increasingly hard to read, emotionally distant, and a risky long-term fit. They weren't firing an employee, they were engineering an excuse. Danielle called in a discovery order, and then the real unraveling began. One by one, internal communications surfaced, sloppy Slack messages, flagged Zoom transcripts, unguarded comments buried in notes that management never imagined would be read outside their bubble. One director wrote, "We can't afford another scene like last quarter. Let's flag Marcus before he becomes a compliance issue." Another replied, "He's technically solid, but let's not wait until it becomes a race card problem." Those words hit Marcus like a punch, not because they were new, but because they were finally visible. The mask of professionalism had slipped, revealing what had always been just beneath. The fear of a black man who didn't apologize for being competent, confident, and quiet. But it didn't stop there. Danielle issued a call for testimonies, discreetly, quietly, through back channels and private networks, and slowly, names began to surface. Former employees, black engineers, analysts, coordinators, all gone from the company, all with eerily similar exits. Some had been let go for being others were passed over for promotions with vague feedback like not leadership material or needs to improve interpersonal dynamics. One woman was demoted after speaking up about being interrupted repeatedly in meetings. None of them had filed complaints. They had left quietly, some with severance, others with silence. But now, with Marcus's case going public, they found their voices again. Danielle compiled their statements. Each one added a weight to the growing storm that was now circling the company's executive floor. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't a single termination, it was a system. When the lawsuit officially hit the court docket, the company responded with speed, too much speed. An email from their legal team arrived just 3 days later. "We're open to discussing a settlement." Marcus read the message with numb fingers. They wanted to settle. Quietly. No media, no admission of fault. A 6-figure offer that came wrapped in non-disclosure language, so tight it might as well have been a muzzle. Danielle leaned back in her chair when she read it. "They're scared," she said, eyes sharp. "This isn't about money to them. It's about keeping the rot under the rug." Marcus stared at the offer for a long time. The dollar amount was more than he'd ever made in a year. Enough to start over. Enough to vanish the whole thing. But he didn't want to vanish. Not anymore. "They want me to disappear," he said. "Just like they tried to make me disappear in that HR office." Danielle folded her hands. "Then we don't settle." He nodded once. Not settling meant exposure, depositions, public scrutiny, headlines. It meant risk, but it also meant truth. That night, as he walked home beneath a silver sky, freckled with stars, Marcus felt something stirring inside him. Not revenge, not even justice. It was clarity. He had lost a job, but now, he was gaining something far more dangerous to people like them: visibility. The courtroom was quieter naturally, so no whispers, no coughs, just the steady tick of the antique wall clock above the judge's bench and the occasional shuffling of papers. The kind of silence that wrapped around the room like tension on a wound spring, waiting to snap. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in a dark navy suit, clean lines, pressed collar, steady breath. To the casual observer, he looked calm, composed even, but inside, a storm churned, not of rage, but of righteous weight, of memory, of the quiet betrayals dressed as policy, of boardroom smiles that meant danger. To his left, Danielle Ross sat poised, flipping through her notes with practiced ease. Across the room sat the company's HR and executive representative, Susan White, among them. She looked different now, smaller somehow. The woman who once sat behind glass walls with polished detachment now shifted uncomfortably under fluorescent lights and legal scrutiny. A junior associate from the company's legal team cleared his throat and stood. "Your Honor, we maintain that Mr. Ellis was terminated based on concerns regarding interpersonal behavior." Danielle rose before he could finish. Behavior that was never documented, never reported formally. No written warnings, no performance failures, not even a verbal notice. The judge raised a hand. "Let's proceed to cross-examine." Susan White was called to the stand. She walked stiffly, adjusting her blazer before swearing in. As she sat, her eyes flickered briefly to Marcus just once, just long enough to remember the day. She said, "This isn't about metrics, it's about culture fit." Danielle approached slowly, her heels clicking across the floor with calm precision. "Ms. White," she began, "can you confirm that Mr. Ellis had no record of misconduct, insubordination, or poor performance reviews in the 18 months prior to his termination?" Susan hesitated. "Correct. And can you confirm that his most recent review signed by his direct manager described him as a top performer and a model of consistency under pressure?" Susan nodded, slowly. "Yes." Danielle didn't flinch. "So if the issue wasn't performance, then what exactly did you mean by culture fit in your internal memos?" Susan straightened in her chair. "It was about team dynamics, tone, communication." "Tone." Danielle's voice sharpened just slightly. "What about Mr. Ellis's tone warranted termination?" Susan looked flustered. "He was often serious, direct. It made others uncomfortable." Danielle stepped closer. "So their discomfort with his demeanor was used as a justification to remove a high-performing black employee." The courtroom murmured. "Objection." The company's attorney called. "Sustained," the judge said. "Rephrase." Danielle did not miss a beat. "Ms. White, were you aware of the recorded meeting from 2 days before Mr. Ellis's dismissal, in which you said, quote, 'He's too intense. You know how they get when they think they're being challenged'?" Susan froze. A beat. "Then I don't recall saying that." Danielle tapped her phone. The recording played just that one line, crystal clear, every syllable slicing through the courtroom like glass, gasps, audible now. Even the stenographer blinked. Danielle turned back. "Do you recall now?" Susan's mouth opened. No sound came out. Danielle faced the judge. No further questions. Marcus sat still, but his chest ached with restrained breath. He had waited months for this moment, not for revenge, but for recognition. For truth to breathe in a place where lies had ruled. The final testimonies came quickly. Former employees, detailing eerily similar exits. Performance records that contradicted vague accusations. A pattern so clear even the jury shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When it was time for the verdict, the judge leaned forward. His voice was low, but each word struck like a bell. "This case reflects systemic bias, masked as professionalism, a culture where perception trumped performance, where leadership confused tone for threat and used discomfort as disguise. The termination of Mr. Ellis was not only unjust, it was discriminatory." A pause. Then, the final blow. The court rules in favor of the plaintiff. Full damages are awarded, including back pay, compensation for emotional distress, and legal fees. The company's internal practices will be subject to review and oversight. Silence again, but not empty. This silence was filled with something else. Vindication. Danielle leaned over. "You did it. she whispered. Marcus exhaled, slowly. Finally, outside the courthouse, reporters had already begun to gather. Microphones, cameras, a low murmur growing like a tidal wave. Within hours, the headlines appeared. Tech company found guilty of discrimination in landmark case. Too intense. How one black engineer's firing sparked a corporate reckoning. #JusticeFor Marcus trends across Twitter, LinkedIn, and national media. The company's stock dipped. Their public statement was generic, sanitized. We are committed to learning from this and improving our internal culture. But for once, Marcus didn't care what they said, because the world had seen. He stood on the courthouse steps, wind brushing against his face, eyes steady as the crowd surged forward. Someone asked, "What will you do next?" He looked out at the reporters, then at the ordinary people who'd shown up in quiet support, former colleagues, black professionals who had emailed him anonymously, others who just ... related. He spoke with the same tone they once feared, calm, measured, unapologetically clear. "I'm not going back. I'm building forward. For everyone who was told they were too much, you were never the problem. They were just never ready for your power." The office was small, just 2 rooms and a shared kitchen above a bakery in Bronzeville, but, to Marcus Ellis, it felt bigger than any corner office he'd ever had. Sunlight poured through the dusty windows, warming the hardwood floors that creaked. With every step, the walls were bare for now, except for a whiteboard scribbled with ideas and acronyms. In one corner, a couch with worn cushions. In the other, a second-hand desk stacked with folders, receipts, and a dented black thermos full of coffee that had long gone cold. There was no corporate logo etched in glass, no buzzwords printed on canvas, just a hand-painted sign over the door. Reclaim, a foundation for justice and restoration. It had been 6 months since the verdict. 6 months since Marcus stood on the courthouse steps and told the world he wasn't going back. He hadn't. No recruiters, no LinkedIn announcements, no second chances at companies that had once ignored his resume. Instead, he'd built something of his own, not to get even but to give others the one thing he never had when the walls closed in. A lifeline that had started small, just a website with a simple mission. We help wrongfully terminated black professionals fight back with legal aid, therapy, access, and community. He thought maybe a few people would click. Maybe someone would reach out. He was wrong. The inbox flooded within days. "I thought I was the only one. This happened to me in 2019. I'm still trying to heal. They made me feel crazy for speaking up. Thank you for proving I wasn't. You gave me hope." Marcus read every message, every name, every story. He kept a folder on his desk labeled Voices, and every night before he left the office, he'd open it, not to weigh himself down but to remember that this wasn't just about him anymore. It never really had been. One afternoon, as a late autumn breeze swept yellow leaves across the sidewalk outside, a woman knocked on the office door. She was in her early 30s, wearing a navy dress and a wool coat too thin for the season. She held a manila envelope in one hand, fingers trembling slightly. Marcus met her at the door. "Hi," she said, almost too softly to hear. I saw your video, the interview, and I didn't know where else to go." He stepped aside. "Come in." She sat on the edge of the couch, hands still clutching the envelope like it might disappear. Her name was Angela, a data analyst, terminated 3 months ago after questioning why her promotion had been passed to a less experienced colleague. HR called it team misalignment. Her manager told her it was a maturity thing. Marcus listened. He didn't interrupt. He let her speak, let her voice tremble, let her unravel without judgment. When she finished, he simply said, "I believe you." She cried, not because of what had happened, but because, for the first time, someone didn't try to explain it away. They filed her case that same week. Danielle helped build the legal angle. Reclay covered the consultation costs. They partnered with a therapist in Hyde Park who offered pro bono trauma-informed counseling. Angela wasn't just fighting back, she was healing. Word spread. By the end of the year, Reclaim had helped 37 professionals secure settlements, legal protections, or public apologies. They hosted support groups, webinars, quiet conversations in church basements, loud panels in college auditoriums. One Friday evening, Marcus stayed late at the office. The city outside buzzed with weekend noise sirens in the distance. Laughter from the bakery below, a saxophone solo drifting from a nearby open window. He sat at his desk, sorting through emails, when a new one popped up. Subject: you don't know me, but I know what they tried to do to you. I've been in your shoes, and I just wanted to say thank you. You didn't just win your case, you gave the rest of us permission to speak. Because of you, I finally opened my mouth. Because of you, I finally stopped apologizing for existing. Marcus stared at the screen. A lump rose in his throat. He closed the laptop gently and leaned back in his chair, staring up at the ceiling with tired, glassy eyes. He didn't know all their names. He didn't know where they lived, or what they'd lost, or how long they'd carried the weight of invisibility on their backs. But they knew his name, and more importantly, they knew they weren't alone. Sometimes, Marcus still had dreams about that day in the HR office. But now, the ending was different. He didn't walk out in silence. He walked out with a crowd behind him, their faces blurry, but their presence undeniable. People who looked like him, people who had been told to sit down, calm down, soften their tone, people who had been pushed aside in conference rooms and erased in performance reviews. And in the dream, Marcus didn't carry a cardboard box. He carried a microphone, and when he spoke, the walls finally listened. Discrimination doesn't always wear a hood or shout slurs across the street. Sometimes it wears a blazer and smiles politely. Sometimes it sips coffee in a conference room while quietly voting someone out of the room. Sometimes it whispers in coded language, not a culture fit, too intense, just a gut feeling. Marcus Ellis had lived through it, not in a headline-worthy incident, not in the kind of blatant injustice that sparks protests on the evening news, but in the slow, quiet erosion of dignity. 1,000 micro-decisions, a dozen looks of hesitation, a series of chats that always ended with nothing written but something taken. He wasn't pushed out of the company by failure. He was pushed out because he refused to become smaller. But the irony was this: they thought removing him would restore comfort. Instead, they exposed a system that they thought silencing him would be the end of the story. Instead, it became the beginning of something far louder. When Marcus walked back into that courthouse with his head high and evidence in hand, he didn't just reclaim his name, he reclaimed a narrative that had been stolen from so many like him. He became a mirror held up to the institution that told him he was too serious, too focused, too confident. They had punished him for not performing comfort, but his refusal to shrink became his greatest rebellion, and his voice went carefully measured in meetings. Once silenced in HR offices began to echo in places no NDA could contain. People started listening, not just to his story, but to the stories that mirrored his. The woman labeled difficult to manage because she spoke with clarity. The man told he wasn't quite executive material because his leadership style didn't resemble their own. The intern passed over because he seemed a bit guarded. These weren't individual failures. They were symptoms of something systemic, and Marcus had pulled back the curtain. Years later, when people asked Marcus what justice felt like, he never pointed to the money. He never talked about the headlines, or the legal victory, or the LinkedIn articles written in his honor. He always said the same thing: justice is walking into a room knowing I don't have to flinch anymore. Because that was what discrimination had done. It taught him to anticipate discomfort, to preempt fear with politeness, to second-guess every email, every comment, every pause after he spoke. But justice meant being able to speak and let silence fall where it may. He didn't need to explain his existence. He didn't need to soften truth to keep a paycheck. He was no longer willing to trade invisibility for stability. Discrimination rarely looks like a monster. It looks like protocol, like company values, like a calendar invite with no subject line. And that's what makes it so dangerous. It doesn't slam doors. It quietly closes them while smiling to your face. But truth, when spoken with courage, has a way of shaking those hinges loose. And courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it looks like staying in your seat when they try to walk around you. Sometimes it's recording the conversation. Sometimes it's saying, I don't accept your version of me. Marcus had done all of those things, and in doing so, he became more than the sum of what they tried to subtract. He was no hero. He was a man who chose not to vanish. He was a man who used his pain like a scalpel, carefully, intentionally, to cut open a conversation others tried to sew shut. In the end, he didn't just win a case, he lit a signal fire, and that fire spread in every whispered Slack message that turned into a forwarded email, in every timid voice that stepped into HR with a printed complaint, in every resignation letter that was followed not by silence, but by a story, because one man's silence had been forced, but his voice once free changed everything, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been told to sit down, be grateful, and not rock the boat. Marcus didn't rock the boat, he built a new one, and then he invited others aboard.